Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's edition of Métis Coffee Talk for this, I believe it's Thursday, October 21st already. And welcome back. This is our second show of Métis Coffee Talk, trying to give news and information for members, our partner communities, and of course, a number of partners that are working with the BC Métis Federation across British Columbia, and then, of course, members that are not only in BC, but we have members from many parts of this country. So tonight will be a series of ideas and updates and information for our members, as we always do. I've got my colleagues with me today. I'll be interviewing, as we promoted, our BC Métis Federation Secretary, and he's also taking on a role of Director of Research, Mr. Joe Desjardins. How are you doing, Joe, this evening?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Great. Well, we'll come to you shortly with the interview, but definitely great to see you, Joe, here this evening. And where are you joining us from, Joe?
North Vancouver, British Columbia.
Oh, okay. Looks like you're in a fancy place there behind you. I'm just teasing you, Joe. I'm just giving you a hard time. And now he's my co-anchor for this show now. It's Mr. JJ Levely from Surrey, BC. JJ,
hey,
how are you this evening?
I'm great. How you guys doing tonight?
Good. That's you got the fiddle and the hat back on. You're ready to go.
Right, we're repping.
Yeah. Hey, I you got that fancy coffee cup still, right?
Oh, that's right. We got this. Look at that.
Well, it's Métis
That's
coffee
stashed
cup.
up.
I have a Métis cup here, but it's not quite as fancy as yours.
Oh, isn't that from the Skeena?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome festival.
Yeah. There you go. All right, JJ. Well, it's Thursday evening. It's kind of yucky weather out. Why don't you warm us up with a fiddle tune to start the show off this week?
All right. We'll give you some of that old fashioned. I think this one's called Golden Slippers. I wonder how they got that name, eh? Think about that one while the tune's going.
Awesome, JJ. That's some great music again. And what was the name of the song again for those that aren't familiar with some of your music?
Golden Slippers.
Okay, Golden Slippers. So you asked us to think about why it was called that. I don't know, Joe, what do you think? Why was it called Golden Slippers? You got any thoughts?
I don't know, but it's similar to whiskey before breakfast, right, JJ?
Yeah, or Crooked Stovepipe.
Yeah, I'm assuming Golden Slippers because it's a pretty fancy quick dance song, right? Does that?
Oh yeah, maybe somebody won a jigging contest and they were nicknamed Mr. or Mrs. Golden Slippers. You never know.
Never know. The legend continues. Right on, JJ. So thanks for joining us this evening. I know we're going to turn to you a number of times through the show to do some nice cultural sharing, of course, of the Métis fiddle music, and always great to have you on the show. Anything you want to share with us before we start this week?
No, it's been a good week. We've been the weather's changing here in British Columbia, so get your rubber boots out and be ready. You don't have to keep your snow shovel handy. It might snow. You never know. But it only lasts about 1 day. So other than that, back to you, Keith.
Perfect. Okay. Before we cut to you, Joe, on a few items I want to introduce you to, I just want to also say happy birthday to one of our board members, Betty Fisher, our director of finance and our treasurer for our board. It's her birthday today. I know a lot of you would have saw it on Facebook, but certainly happy birthday, Betty. She's proud Métis elder in our organization with our community. And I've known Betty many, many, many years back in Saskatchewan as well. And just want to say, I don't quite know how old she is, but she's still full of life and joie de vie and all that sort of stuff. And I just want to say happy birthday on behalf of the organization to our board member, Betty. And then we did feature her in the newsletter under the board member minutes. So I thought it'd be great to just to call it out and say happy birthday to you. Joe, now let's cut back to you, Joe. I mean, we've got lots of items to cover. It's been a busy time at the Federation, and I know, Joe, you've been very, you've been part of this journey as we've been building the Métis Federation for the last 10 years. But we want the members and the partners now to learn a little bit more about who you are today, right? And I know over the years you've been on the radio show and the previous iterations of Métis Coffee Talk, but why don't we just introduce you again to the public here and our members? Let's start with what is your position, Joe?
I took on the position here as Director of Research. It's a recent position. I'm really excited. It can't be had without a team, certainly. I think of Dr. Bruce Shelby, an academic historian who's come along beside to assist in the role of academic consultant, and Tanner Timothy is from the Coast Salish. He's working with us as well, working with GIS, Geographical Information Systems, as well. We have our community research partners, Val, Cindy, Gail, Mary, Taylor, Roseanne, and others that are working. We can't do this work without them. So it's an exciting time, Keith.
Yeah, just on that note, Joe, just before I go on to your another question I was going to ask you, I know on the website, for those that are following tonight, you've taken on a role, as you say, as research. So just bring it up I'm just going to just share with everyone. You mentioned a couple of names. So if you go to our website and see staff and contractors, you can see an org chart. And what we've created at the Federation, just to give it context, is, my role is to work directly with the board and to be that liaison between the board. Our board is a governance board and the operations, right? And we've been evolving down this road for a while now. And Joe has now taken on a more management role within the organization. He'll be transitioning into that role more permanently as a previous board member. But Director of Research, Joe is here, and the two individuals he talked about was Dr. Bruce Shelby, who's the research consultant, and then you got terrestrial GIS contractor, and that was Tanner, I believe you said was the name?
Tanner Timothy.
Right. So everyone knows we've been continuing to evolve this research to help about what is the history of the Métis in this province. And I know, Joe, we're going to talk a bit more about that, but just to give everyone that sort of context of the work you're doing and the important role within the organization of that research. So, Joe, just coming back to you now for a moment, tell me a bit about your upbringing and family. I know obviously we've known each other well, but just again for the members and those watching tonight.
Sure. I spent my early years around Metro Vancouver. My earliest years around Millardville. A large Métis contingent community is in Millardville. My mom was Ukrainian from Fork River around Dauphin, Manitoba. My dad's family comes from Saint Lazare in Manitoba. His dad came from Saint Francois Xavier, and both sides shape my identity and the way I look at it. And really, Keith, Métis people are storytellers. We come from a big family of my uncles, 10 brothers and sisters among my dad's sisters and brothers. So there's always someone coming or going and telling stories. And I think of the kitchen culture. It was really evident in our life growing up, and storytelling was evident to Dad. I'll get talking a little bit more when we talk about identity, though.
So just for those that maybe aren't familiar with other parts of the province, like Millardville, where is that today? Where is that location here in Lower Mainland?
Millardville is in Coquitlam in the Lower Mainland. It's where a lot of the French-speaking community gathered after the war, particularly before and after the war. And a lot of Métis came from other parts of the province and ended up there as well.
Okay. So tell us a little about your Métis identity and growing up. Obviously, you touched on it, but a little bit, what else about growing up Métis did did you see and learn?
I think like in my home, we didn't use the term Métis to describe ourselves growing up. And that's a similar common thread that we hear with other families. I didn't grow up with an awareness of my collective Métis history and identity. We knew we had some Indian ancestry, and this came out in family stories. And, you know, many Métis people experience racism, for instance, if they identified as Métis, so they hid it. And there wasn't really, Keith, no room to be Métis and British Columbian at the same time. When I look back, this had a big impact on me, but it wasn't talked about. It was, and around me growing up, most people had no idea. They might mention Louis Riel or voyageurs, or, you know, again, the French Canadian community. We were sidekicks to the great European explorers. Others viewed them, you know, as you might have heard, we've heard, as rebels or even villains. And so they were described to us and to me growing up in certain ways. And this really did shape our thinking, the dominant Canadian idea, that interpretation of understanding our identity. And it proceeded. That said, my family adapted. I think back, they responded to these pressures and these things in their own Métis way. And one word, I guess, they were resilient. Many of our families made their way to BC to escape poverty. And our family was no different. We adapted to life, society in BC. We fit in. We were resilient. We had to find work. So it was, and, you know, along the edges, being Métis was evident in the way we related. I think of, you know, my family, we're a visiting culture in the sense. We like to visit a lot, you know, with these 10 uncles and aunts, like I said. And they had connections back in Manitoba, and people are always coming and going, traveling. There was multiple spaces and places being shared at the same time. And that's important in terms of the work that we're doing, because identity can be very complex. You know, after work, I think of JJ, what he's doing there. My dad would pull out the fiddle, and I still remember the smell of the rosin. I remember looking at the album covers while he was playing, and I'd see Andy DeJarlis. He was my grandpa's second cousin, and trying to make sense of it all. So the music, and then I grabbed the guitar and started to accompany Dad at the guitar. So fond memories about my identity, in the same time mixed in with these other challenges.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're talking a lot about how you reconnected, or you're connected with your identity, right, through these experiences. But, you know, is that, in your opinion, or what are your thoughts? Like, how do you think the current Métis people would feel about their way growing up? I mean, at least us as organizations, I know we're not the only one, but we're trying to help share this information so people feel like they can identify with a cultural group or a recognition. But how do you think it's any easier today for the younger people growing up trying to connect with their Métis identity?
You know, and I can only really reflect to my story, and I speak to them in this sense that for me, it's been a long journey, bump up and down journey. And Keith, you, the members of the Federation, we've all played a role in my journey, and we do. And that's the cool thing about community. In the beginning, I remember I was just married. I was maybe 28 years old. My uncle invited me to get a Métis card. And so when I was first married, and it was with a regional group, the Pacific Métis. And, you know, in this context, after I got the card, there were no opportunities for me to build relationship. And then the group kind of dissolved. And, you know, for me, so it was a bump in the road right off the bat. You know, I was wondering why I even had the card. And then in the early 90s, I met Ken and Betty Fisher. And that was an interesting time because Ken was the president of the Métis local community in Surrey. I worked in construction. After work, I'd pull in there in the office in Cloverdale. Then he moved over to the Dell Hotel near thereabouts. And I figured out slowly, you know, there was a larger, big Métis community, collectively speaking, in Surrey. And like I said, you float along the edges of your identity and you don't realize that there's actually a group of people like you that sometimes, you know, are around and hidden in plain sight. And for Ken, it was the first place I could go where I could drop in, have a coffee, look at all his books on genealogy. and come and talk to someone about being Métis. And I began to, and it was a safe place. And I began to read my family history at the same time. It sparked an interest in me. So I started to read, hear, listen, and I realized that my ancestors were involved in formative events. I started to see the names of our ancestors go by in big events like early events around when Canada fought the Métis, and even earlier before that, and how they made alliances with First Nations. Some even fought Canada in my own family ancestry to express their own community interests. They petitioned Canada, they negotiated with Canada. And here I am reading this stuff and I'm thinking, wow, this is really interesting. So I started to apply it in my academic studies. I did some graduate work. I went back and I started to think about topics like we hear a lot about colonialism and justice. And I realized there was a bigger picture here, and I saw some of the racism that was going on. And I thought to myself, there were generations of people here that were disconnected from community and kinship, loss of knowledge and that kind of thing, cut off from the land. And then I kind of started to make ties to my own family. And I started to ask questions about, okay, well, why were some in my family, did they live on the road allowance? Why was it like this for these people? And I began to connect the dots. So, but at the end of the day, it was making friends and building relationships in community. I volunteered. I started to just go to meetings. I listened, I learned from people, and I gathered my courage and started to do stuff like this. It's not easy, and to get start to sharpen your voice and that kind of thing. And that's how it evolved for me, Keith.
Right. So obviously, you have had a very interesting journey to connecting with being Métis, and obviously knowing that you came from that Métis ancestry. But, one thing that I've been a big proponent of as president of this organization, and a number of you have heard me say this before, but, we just lack research. And, you've taken on this role with research. So what does that mean to you? Like how, like in terms of like, why are you interested in, obviously, is it just your family journey that brought you into the importance of researching Métis history? Like what brought you to really, really want to do that kind of, critical work for the future?
About 10 years ago, I was doing some work after I did some work as a consultant for Parks Canada. And I started to look around and I realized there was very little scholarship on mixed ancestry Métis identities, particularly from a Pacific Northwest or a BC perspective. They were invisible in our textbooks, in our schools. I looked around and I went, whoa, I can't believe this. It was as if they were pushed to the margins, and I wanted to know more. It was maybe an intellectual curiosity at that point because of my background in history and different things like that. If they were mentioned in accounts, they were written in as, like I said before, sidekicks, or they were, I found some examples where Métis had predated explorers in their travels. And yet then I started to read some of these accounts by whether it's the European writers, such as the geographers and what have you, and they were giving white explorers the credit for these discoveries. And I knew there was an inconsistency there. So, and then the other thing is, watching the political organizations since the 90s, I noticed that Métis organizations, they were focused on securing government recognition and funding for bread and butter issues. And certainly I recognize the need for that kind of thing. But at the same time, I noticed that they were clever in that if they could establish a story of origin, they could control the history. In other words, they could create, we've heard a lot in the latest conversations, narratives around distinctions-based identity. So what I started to realize is that the research and the funding gathered, favored by governments and certain Métis groups, have focused on Métis originating from a certain time and a certain place, such as the Red River. As well, most scholarship and popular writing, it's usually preoccupied with French, English, Plains, Cree, Ojibwe kind of themes. But I began to realize that a one-size-fits-all approach didn't take into account, like I described earlier, the Pacific Northwest histories uh, and the local kinship networks that are diverse. That, in my view, I realized that, like living in the Lower Mainland in BC, it's different from Hudson's Hope. Yet we have commonalities, of course. But so again, coming out of my studies, I was reading early studies. I read the Senate Standing Committee report in 2013, I believe. When it came to collective rights, the idea of the existence of a community, it was apparent to me that there's a lot more work that needed to be done to understand the history of these peoples right here, Keith, in the Pacific Northwest. And we needed to recover this knowledge, and we needed to partner with one another to do it and make it visible. And again, we need to hear these many stories.
Yeah. I wanted to share with you, it's a little bit of I'm going to just share a commentary we often hear, and I won't, I'll do my best not to be too negative about it, but I won't say the name, but I put on a screen here. There was a comment that you can see on the screen. It says, here in BC, one of our board members got this, right? So it says, history of BC is very clear, Earl. There was no Métis in BC, period. Yet you are pushing, and I'll just minimize this a little bit. You're pushing for funding that takes away from the true title holders, and this is wrong. This is a First Nation representative, and without getting into all the history of it and the rest of it, I mean, to you as a researcher, I disagree with this, right? Obviously, I'm not a researcher, but I have been around historical work done in BC. But this is a view of many First Nations, and this is this was written 3 days ago. And what do you have to say with people that say things like this that are, is it true? Is there no Métis history in BC? Were we not here in BC? Would you agree with this statement?
Oh boy, it's again, like I think that we stepped into the area of research because we were invited to participate in a knowledge partnership project in 2018 by the province. At that time, we did a project for 1 month. I remember it was like a whirlwind project. You might remember that one, Keith.
Yeah.
And we stated from our recommended findings that we got a glimpse of the fact that a more expanded and nuanced identity was necessary to reflect the history that was emerging. Because we had been saying this in different ways, the idea that there are many ways of being Métis in response to the identity politics that you referred to there. And so we were calling for a relationship with the government of British Columbia. We asked for a partnership agreement. We wanted to fund a research division, and that's still outstanding, by the way. And this is where we could fund research strategies, public research, to respond to communities. So a community can come along and say, listen, we need the means, capacity to respond to those kind of challenges, whether on social media or whether by First Nations or whether by Métis nations or by governments or whomever might come along and say certain things. And that our work was further legitimized by the findings and recommendations that flowed out of the Land and Life project in 2020, a federal funded study by, for that matter. And I'll answer your question this way. The findings came through, the historical record was clear that Métis have a nuanced history as unique, self-determined peoples, kinships, and communities in the Pacific Northwest. Self-determining peoples is a key word here. They acted in their own interest. It also became clear, and this is very important, that ties into the comments you're making, it became disturbingly clear that mixed ancestry Métis communities have experienced systemic racism and discrimination. And BC officials viewed the half-breed population as a threat to white settler dominance. And I want to stop there. Half-breed is a word a descriptor that was used in history to describe Métis. It was a popular descriptor at the time. So they saw them as a threat to white settler dominance and to this division between settlers and Indians. And in our work, we realized that this discrimination was clear and that the government officials took steps to segregate and displace people. So Métis were removed from their kinship, whether with First Nations or with other Métis communities, and they were pushed to the historical, political, and social margins of the province. Now, scholars tell us it was about gaining access to land. Now, these are very important ideas that through our research, we're bringing these ideas forward. I think about, will BC, Canada, and First Nations begin to understand and the reality of this for Métis peoples? This has yet to be determined. And Prime Minister Trudeau just said it recently. Before we can get to reconciliation, we need to get to the truth. So you can say one thing on social media, but it's incumbent on all of us as Canadians and as Indigenous peoples in this country to try and look for the truth, Keith.
Right. Why don't we well, I want to come back to you in a second. I want to just see JJ, maybe cue up the fiddle. It's a pretty heavy conversation, and I want to talk to you. I know there's a couple items I'd like to finish with Joe with you. And what I want to do next is we'll have JJ do a song, and I want to come bring up the First Nation Leadership Council letter and our response and some of the things that we pointed out that through your work. And then I want to finalize some stuff about research. So JJ, why don't we take a break from that heavy conversation?
Well, yeah, no, that was really very interesting. Joe, amazing work that you're doing. And I think British Columbians and people across the province really need to hear, because this is very important stuff, and good job to you and your team. Like I was clued in the whole time. Very interesting work that you're doing there, and thanks for that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I want to get everybody to join me here, those at home. Okay, so Keith made an announcement that we had a board member's birthday. So everybody tune up your voices at home, and we're going to sing a little happy birthday to Betty Fisher out there. Me, 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 me. Me, 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 me. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Betty. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Betty. Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Betty.
Well, thanks, JJ. There you go. It lightened it up just like that, but really appreciate that. And again, I know Betty only turned, I think, 22 or something like that. I'm not sure, but but anyway.
Linda, 29 and Holden.
Yeah, there you go. You're probably mad we're talking about this, but anyways, but thanks for doing that, JJ. We'll come back to you. So get your next song ready soon.
Right.
Joe, I want to come back. We'll come back to this in a moment, but we did have a comment on here, and I've been sorry, I forgot to mention everyone that we are following online with some of the people that are commenting. So good evening to everyone that's online right now on our Facebook page that many of you are watching from. We'll try and remember to answer questions. So sorry I missed this, but we had a question from Jem. It says, from one to another, what does Métis mean to you, and how can we impact our community? Joe, I'll ask you your response, but I'm going to just say a couple words on this if I can first. So I think Métis to me means, obviously the way I grew up, might be different than some of the history in the Pacific Northwest that Joe was referencing. But the fact is we do have a bond that ties us all together. So as Métis for me, it was about, family. It was about the Michif language. It was about fiddling, and actually jigging was in my family. I grew up in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. I've been in BC now for about 20 years. That's not the same shared experience that other Métis families have had. That's only mine. So for what Métis means to me is that connection with family, culture, language, all those things that it meant to me, and sort of how I grew up. Now, the hard part is a lot of families in BC, because of what Joe's talking about in that marginalization, it was invisible. No one brought it to their attention. Where I grew up, Métis, half-breed, whatever we were, it was well known. Like the history was so strong, and there was such a large population and presence that it just survived in spite of the challenges of politics and racism and the other things that so many families faced in other parts of this country. I think what Joe is trying to articulate as well is that some of our mobility, some of our families came here in the 1800s, and it's the same families that may have originated in other parts of this country. And there was a shared existence here in this country or in BC, and we're trying to work our way through that. So what we're trying to give people today with the BC Federation is a sense of community and family and culture. And that's why we have JJ on here. That's why we're doing the things we do. So that's what it means to me. Others might see it different. What's your thoughts, Joe, on what does Métis mean to you?
Well, I hope that like my story and sharing it, it can just unfold the many facets of being Métis in the sense you touched on a lot of them, Keith. You got the relationality among Métis, the fact that we have kinship, extended kinship networks. And those are two very important components of being Métis that I would like to see move forward in our studies, because I'm kind of jumping ahead a bit because it ties into my thoughts on Métis history and identity. And I've been saying for quite some time that there are many ways of being Métis. And I read a quote by leading scholar Jennifer Brown on Métis studies. She puts it like this: Métis history keeps being made. It does not stand still. Métis scholars and family historians in particular are contributing to the retrieval and recognition of their historical identities. Such fine-grained and thoughtful historical work as theirs is essential to the quest for a grounded and nuanced Métis history. Those are key words. Helping to elucidate a people's experiences, qualities, culture, and unique heritage. They also show us that there is no Métis core identity, but rather a range along a spectrum reaching from east to west, north to south. Their research is tracing not only core, but connections, the complex links that tie together many communities and individuals who may identify as Métis Indian or simply as partly Aboriginal and descent. Now, there's a lot there, Keith, but I think you can see the complexity that I hope that can be. I'll unpack that a little bit later, though. I think it's important in terms of how, in the context of some of the current challenges around Métis identity, whether it's among Métis or with perhaps First Nations, those are important types of conversations to unpack.
Well, I just want to keep reminding people of a few points on this too. I grew up in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, as I mentioned in my comments prior. The Métis in Prince Albert felt we were different than the Métis in Northwest Saskatchewan. And that's the truth. I mean, my family came right from Batoche. They were right in Fish Creek after the historic events of 1885. Many of them ended up in Prince Albert. Those are my direct family. But there was other communities like Cumberland House and Isle Lacrosse and Beauval and all of these sort of communities, but we weren't all the same. They spoke more Cree up north. We spoke more dirty French. I mean, we called it. So it's like, we have to understand it's the same with First Nations in this country. There's 630 plus First Nation communities. They're not all homogenous and the same. And so I think the danger that I think a lot of people get caught up in is there needs to be one way of being Métis. And I think Joe, that's the point. I've always agreed with you that there's many ways of being Métis. And we just have to find those connecting threads of, is it language? Is it community? Is it family? It's all those things, right? So anyways, JJ, I want to get your perspective on this. You come from another, obviously Manitoba. What does it Métis mean to you?
Oh, well, I mean, it's the music, it's the culture, it's the family, it's the food, it's the connection. I've had the pleasure of touring Canada. I mean, some days I consider myself the most blessed guy around. I made a good living at touring Canada, and all the way from the Northwest Territories, as far east as Nova Scotia, and all the way west here to British Columbia, and of course from the prairies, played in Batoche, Saskatchewan. And everywhere you go, you end up finding a Métis family or somebody there. Somebody's always seek me out. Hey, we hear you're in town. Hey, JJ, I heard you're in town. Hey, we're Métis. Would you like to come for dinner? There's Métis everywhere, and that connection that you guys talk about. it's so hard to put it into words, Keith, but all I know is that our unique music, this fiddle, it is unique. There's no music like it in the world. There's Canadian style fiddle, there's French style fiddle, there's Irish style fiddle, but you have seen it firsthand. When you go to a Métis square dance and you get the fiddle player and you get that square dancers kicking, the energy just jumps up in the room. Everybody so we have this distinct music. We have this distinct culture. And no matter where I've been in the country, it's allowed me to get invited into people's homes, people's communities. And I meet so many Métis out there. And so what does it mean to me? It's a love that never goes away. We are a strong people. And although people are trying to point out where you have no distinct place where you're from, hey, I've been across this country. There are Métis in every part of this country. I've been there. I've been to these communities. I've played square dances in these communities. I went to Old Crow. I went to Fort McPherson. I've met Métis out there, and the Gwich'in Nation, and the fiddle and the music. And so we are a strong culture, and I don't think we should ever be deterred by what people think. We know who we are. I know who I am. Joe, Keith, we know who we are. We're the Métis. We ain't going anywhere. We've been across this country for many, many years. And, as long as I'm around, as long as this instrument is still around, and we're able to spread that culture and keep it alive. Because, we're making history every day. The new Métis tunes are coming out, new fiddle styles. I was talking with a member at work today, and we're seeing how some of the new dances are mixing with hip hop. And it's taking traditional Métis dance and mixing it into hip hop to get younger kids into it. So the Métis music is so influential. It's not going anywhere. Our culture is not going anywhere. And I mean that in a strong statement. We're here to stay.
So Joey, just going back to you, thanks JJ. I want to go back to you, Joe. We've had a few questions raised by some folks. I just want to maybe ask you a couple of your thoughts on that. One was about from Mr. Don Woodcock, who's following along tonight, who you know well. He's asking about residential schools in BC and Métis experience. I mean, we are not hearing a lot of that narrative on in the media, but the fact is there was Métis people in residential schools. We know that it's affected some of our own families. We have board members that attended residential schools where they're from. I mean, so thoughts on that and some commentary on that?
And I agree, with Don, and I think that's certainly an underexplored area of part of this systemic discrimination and racism that has yet to be explored. And there's no question that racism, if you step away from the residential school conversation, it's an important component of the story. And I completely agree with Don. And at the same time, I really, as part of our research, when it comes around to the Métis communities asserting their right to self-determination and building capacity in their own communities, we need to build on good, solid, community-based research if we want to make a good case for mutual recognition. Politicians can say their talking points in the media about how they want to do reconciliation, but we're, as Métis people, guided by our communities, we're starting to get a better idea of what our communities want, and they're very savvy.
Yeah. I want to bring us to a point here. We wonder sometimes why some of our people probably hide or even choose to hide. And, I have to say, we posted this letter. We were sent a letter from the First Nation Leadership Council, which is a significant, powerful political set of First Nation leaders. And I want to just start by saying that the BC Métis Federation supports First Nations. We support their territorial rights. We support their First Nation rights. We understand the importance of that. But this letter took us back, and we really felt, and I know we've had lots of comments. We've posted this on our website and Facebook page, and we sent an update to our members. We were really disappointed, just so everyone hears it directly from me with some verbal sort of response. we never wrote to the First Nation Leadership Council. We wrote to the province in a few months ago in July, asking why we were not being engaged with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. But what we believe the First Nation Leadership Council has done is really politicize this issue and turn it to about resources. I'll just highlight a few pieces. The letter's on our website. I won't go through the whole letter, but we it's very clear the First Nation leadership has taken the position that no Métis should be at a table talking about the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And if people look into what some of the context of that international declaration was, it wasn't, yes, there's title issues, which is what the First Nations are really hanging their position on. But what about education? What about culture? What about self-governance? What about children and family services? What about all the things that will help protect our culture and help it survive? We Métis live in BC. There's 90,000 of us. We don't represent all of the Métis, but we were just they took a very assertive role with us. And I shared one email from a representative, an individual, and all that. What the danger of these letters by leadership does is that you say, I'll read you the final paragraph. Well, the Declaration Act should be a positive force for all Indigenous people across Canada and the world, including the Métis. It cannot be used as to aggrandize untenable positions at the expense of First Nation and opportunities to advance their legitimate rights and interests. At best, these claims are a baseless attempt to secure a seat at the table where none is warranted, diverting resources and focus away from legitimate holders of Aboriginal rights and title in British Columbia. At worst, they are a harmful assertion of authority reminiscent of colonization to lands in British Columbia over which First Nations hold rightful sovereignty, rights, and title. They strongly disagree and indeed rejects any such claims and fully expects the government of British Columbia to respect and uphold proper First Nation title and rights. We wonder why there's this narrative out there with First Nations saying, "Oh, we're the Métis trying to get resources." Well, they plant these seeds in here. That wasn't the reason we asked to be engaged in our letter in June, or July, pardon me. We wanted to be, we have legitimate members who are Métis people, who our language is dying, our kids are being apprehended, we're dealing with child and family issues, we have very little access to education support for our kids. These are all bread and butter table contemporary issues. And we don't take a back seat to this. And, we sent a letter, I'm sure many members saw, that we did send a fairly a respectful letter, but one that basically said, thanks for pointing this out, but certainly, we don't agree with you. We sent the letter on October 12th, and I won't go into the letter context. What I will say, that's Joe, where his work has been critical as our director of research. For those of you that are watching tonight, we made sure in this letter we responded, and hopefully people have had a chance to read it, and I'm sure many of you have. But Joe, why don't you just quickly talk about some of the historic, because they say in the First Nation Leadership Council, there's no contemporary Métis communities like any of us here, is the way I think they're interpreting this, and there's no historic Métis people in this province. So, you helped us put this together, and you spoke a bit, but can you just quickly touch on some of the I guess the information that we put in this letter?
Sure. I mean, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier in the sense that when I talked about how Métis people experience racism, and what kind of impact that was in terms of, and then I was talking a little bit about how in history we saw public officials embark in more of a systemic racism, and I think that that's what we were trying to explain in and through the letter.
Yeah, it's not a big deal, Joe. I know we're just in the interest of time. I know you touched on this about, but I just wanted to give context, because a lot of I guess my point to this for our members and people watching tonight is the Federation is doing a lot of effort and energy and work into this research, because a lot of British Columbians, never mind our own Métis people, but just First Nations, non-Métis, non-Indigenous people, are yet to realize that there is history that's academically proving our existence in this province prior to the 1850 sort of benchmark they've set, and it's been there in plain sight in the archives, and that's where we're getting this information. And I think it's time that we start to make sure we assert that this history is there. We're not making this up. and despite what the First Nation Leadership Council wrote in their letter, we certainly absolutely are not creating a history here. This is absolutely academically proven, academically in place. And the question becomes, does it, I mean this so carefully, like you can see that families in this province have been faced discrimination and racial attitudes since the 1800s, and nothing's changed. So, just to end with, when we responded to this letter, I'm going to leave you all with one point. We put in the whole piece of declaration. What does the UN Rights Declaration talk about? And these are all things that affect our members. So we don't say sorry for that. We've continued our conversation with the province, and we're seeing progress. So I will just say this, that, what I would say to the Leadership Council and any other first, we're here. We're not minding. We're not trying to step on your toes. We're not trying to take money from you. We're just making sure that our culture, our kids, our families, our community somehow has a way to reconnect and keep our culture alive. And we're unapologetic. And I think we all need to learn what reconciliation means between Indigenous peoples. And that's a fact. Like, if we can't reconcile with each other, how do we expect the rest of Canada or British Columbians to reconcile with us, or with First Nations, or with any Métis people? So I think we need to show some more leadership. So I'll just leave that there for now, Joe. It's a touchy subject to me. It really bothers me, considering all the work we've done, all the work that I've personally done with many great First Nation communities. I was shocked by the letter, to be quite candid. So, Joe, what's your goals through your work with research? I mean, obviously we touched on how that kind of transforms what you're doing into some of these sort of key letters and correspondence. What really is ultimately your goal with the research department?
Sure. In a nutshell, we're looking for wholeness of communities, community wholeness. Our goal is to facilitate knowledge partnerships that lead to community wholeness. There's been 150 years of systemic racism and discrimination. So we're saying, listen, through looking at building strong relationships among ourselves, with others like First Nations, through the idea of drawing people and groups into conversations with our communities at the local level and building relationships, we can start to partner together, and we can demonstrate that these communities existed in the past and then they exist today. And I think that that's really positive for our members, because we want to help our members, rather than declare that we're the voice of Métis in this province and try and draw money or funding or act in that way. We're saying, no, we want to equip all these different community voices to be heard. It's a very different model altogether. I call it partnership. So.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, just don't leave yet. We've got a few more things I want to do, because we're gonna run out of time. It's we only got about 7 minutes left. So JJ and I want to come to you for one more song. Okay, why don't you do one more song right now, and at the end of the show we're going to finish with a little song too.
All righty. Well, here's that one you were talking about earlier there, Joe. Send us out to Joe. It's called was it Whiskey Before Breakfast?
You got it. Yeah.
Awesome, JJ. That's some great tunes there for sure. Whiskey Before Breakfast. Oh, that song brings me back. I mean, I've heard that song for decades, and it's definitely one of the Métis favorites for sure out there. To get the spoons get pulled out on that one for sure. A couple other items I want to talk about before we leave everyone tonight. I hope everyone's had a chance to see. We just released our October newsletter, and I'm certainly hoping people had a chance to see the newsletter. Went out to, if you're not on our email distribution list, it's on our website, of course. This is we talked about our Métis coffee talk, and of course, as I had earlier. But the big one that we put in the newsletter for this month was just making sure members know that we're having our virtual annual general meeting. We were planning a significant in-person AGM, but just the COVID and we just with the requirements, there's still a number of members that aren't fully vaccinated, and it will be required shortly, as we all know. And these, the health requirements are at any hotels not. So we've elected to go to a virtual annual general meeting. It'll be November 6th from 1 till 3. It'll be obviously aired on our page, but members will be sent an email in the coming weeks to register for the AGM, and there'll be a voting platform for you to vote on all of the items. So just please keep that in your books, November 6th, 1 till 3 Pacific time, of course, and we'll be featuring this across the network, and we're hoping members really tune in. It's not the way we want. We'd love to have you there to listen to JJ live and see some jigging and dancing, but it's just not going to work out. So that was really important. So we did put out our notice, legal notice required. This has gone out to all the members and that, and so we're working to make sure. So if you're not up to date with your membership information, please make sure that you contact our office at 604-638-7220 and ask for Angel, just to make sure that your contact information, email, mailing address is all correct. That's what's going to how we're going to send information, with primarily through emails, of course. So if you don't see an email, please contact the office, talk to Angel, make sure we have that, and we'll add you to the information. There's also a number of other items in the newsletter, industry updates, Coast Guard program information. We did COVID-19 community support. We just handed out the third phase of checks for roughly about 350 families that were in financial need. So please, those relief funds have all been sent out. So let us know if you haven't got your check. You had to apply. We had a process prior. So if you didn't apply, then you won't be in that system. But those that there should be many checks out there now. So anyways, no, and obviously we talked about this First Nation Leadership Council issue. In the future, though, we're going to be talking a little bit more next month on Métis Coffee Talk about the Michif language. We've got a multi-year funded project with Heritage Canada, and it was there'll be more of a press release about it out shortly. It was actually announced, or approved about a month or so ago, and we have a major curriculum development to expand on the previous program. So we're quite excited to share, and we'll have we should have on our next show Jeannie Cardinal, the director of Michif language. So, lots going on in the Federation. Hopefully you're getting that newsletter and that update. And I think, I would just continue to say to people, if you're not on those email distributions, it's an easy way to sign in. You just go into our website and just sign in. It's a simple thing. The last thing I will share with you, though, on here, before I finish up with one other community member update, we also recently released our 2020-2021 annual report. I just encourage people, if you want to know what we've been doing at the Federation and how far we've come in a short period of time over the last 10 years, you can have a look. We have a significant reporting document we've put out, and you can see from all the different projects and initiatives, beyond what just myself, JJ, and Joe are talking about tonight. We're very proud to say that we're sitting in the best position we've ever been in 10 years. Expanded programs, expanded support, continuing to build our strategic plan. So, if you get a chance, spend a few minutes. And of course, I won't go through this in depth now, because we will give a more thorough report at the annual general meeting on November 6th. And we'll give you a lot more insight into the financial health of the organization and all the other items that are going. So hopefully you'll join us again for November 6th. Now, one last thing I want to share before, and then I'll wind up some closing comments from Joe and JJ. We have members that are doing all sorts of really great things. And, one member that's been, really close to us for a lot of years is our leader out in Dawson Creek. It's Rodney Lambert, and he's been running a culture camp. And I just want to share with people, he's trying to do that. I have a short little video about it, and I want to just share it. It'll take about a minute, and I just want everyone to take a look at what kind of things that Rodney's trying to do to help support Métis people learn about Métis culture up in Dawson Creek, which is Northeast BC. or not. Okay, I'm gonna have to figure this out. I've done something not good. I gotta figure out how I'm gonna just get the screen so that it's not doing that. There we go. Sorry, I'll bring this back. Sorry, guys. So when we talk about saving our culture, that's an example where we're seeing our local leadership, in this case, Rodney's an elder from Dawson Creek, and he's doing his best to try and bring together a cultural camp. That's just an initial vision of what he's trying to do there, and he's been building that. And you saw different sort of cultural practices he does, which are relevant for his family. But it looks exciting, and we're going to be there to try and help see how we can continue to bring opportunities for members to go be part of that camp, right? These are the kind of things we want our kids to learn a little bit about being back on the land and those little trappers tents, and maybe just a small glimmer into the way many of our ancestors lived. It'd be very important. So, Joe, any final comments you want to say for tonight? I know we've kind of have to rush the ending here, but any thoughts about the show tonight? And well, thanks for being on here, but any final thoughts that you didn't get out?
No, I think it's great that like JJ sharing and you sharing, and we're seeing the many ways of being Métis. You know, others, they want culture expressed in different ways. Some people are involved in economic development. Others are interested in wellness, like Rodney. And it's neat to see all these things where people, you know, the stories come out of the community, and we're here to help equip the members to get these stories out. And it's through relationship building. And I want to make sure people understand that is first and foremost. So thanks for the opportunity to share tonight.
Thanks, Joe. Really great to have you on the show. JJ, my friend, why don't you, any final comments before you wind us up with a song, and then I wrap up the show?
Well, for one, wow, I want to head down to Rodney's there. That looks like a great place to relax and learn some more about the culture. And I just want to say it's been an awesome show tonight. Thank you for it. I learned something all the time. And I just want to remind all our First Nations brothers and sisters out there. I have a lot of friends, First Nation friends here, musicians in British Columbia. And I want to remind them that if you look back in history and really look back in Canadian history, the Métis and the First Nations have been partners for many years. We were not adversaries. We were friends. We were trading partners. We were brothers and sisters. And we still do that in the music business. I mean, I never have any animosity amongst my brothers and sisters out there in the industry. So I just want to urge all the ones out there to just remember that us Métis and the First Nations have been partners and friends for many, many years. And we want to continue that here in British Columbia.
What song are you going to finish with there, JJ?
Well, I think we'll do something called the wind that turns the mill, or as my uncle calls it, the wind that turns the mill.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
thanks, JJ. That's the wind that turns the mill.
The wind that turns the mill. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to do it with your slang there, but
Well, no, my uncle used to say, okay, here's the wind that turns them ill.
oh yeah, that's the yeah.
I
Well,
don't know,
well, thanks,
but
JJ.
it's
again.
called the wind that turns the mill.
Awesome. Well, thanks, JJ, for being on the show, and certainly
Thanks for having
you.
me.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for being on the show, and I'm happy to be here. Of course, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be on next month again in November. We're doing this show monthly, so I look forward to seeing everyone in November. Remember, keep a couple key dates coming up. November 6th is our annual general meeting online, so please watch for details on our email distribution and make sure you attend that day. We have lots of exciting things to update the membership with, and some of the other things that are upcoming, just news and information about the Michif language work that we're doing and other things. So yeah, I hope everyone has a great Halloween shortly, and I just want to say thank you, everyone.